Hi, welcome back to Virtual Wellbeing. Lovely to see you again. My name is Lars Hansen, I'm a psychiatrist, and I am, as always, very keen to give you some good tips on how to live a better life. And this is a really good place to start the theme of today, and that is perfectionism. It's actually a very bad name for this condition. It should rather be called imperfectionism, because what people do with perfectionistic tendencies, they hone in on all their imperfections, and it is really hell on earth. And what we're seeing at the moment is a true epidemic of perfectionism. It is much more common now than it was just a few decades ago. And we can of course wonder why that is. But it is perhaps because of increasing individualism and the internet that gives a sense that if you make a mistake, you will never be forgiven, it will never be forgotten. Forgiveness is really a foreign land currently. And then there is also increased competition. It looks as if there is. Perfectionism is more of a problem in women than it is in men, and I think most of you will also recognize that. And the mindset underlying perfectionism is that things must be completely perfect, otherwise everything else will fall apart. It's a kind of all or nothing thinking that we have been talking about before, and that's really the enemy of a good life. All or nothing, everything perfect, otherwise things are absolutely hopeless. It is my personal sense, and I see it a lot here in my clinic, it's my personal sense that the perfectionism often is centered in three specific areas. Looks very much. We talked about that recently in the beauty trap video. So looks is one of them. Oh, my nose is not good enough. I can't go out because I'm not pretty enough. The other one is schoolwork or academic work. If it's not straight A's, nope, not good enough. I'm a hopeless failure. And then also in social activities, I sneezed when I saw a friend, or I said something stupid, and I think everybody will remember this and never forgive me. What are the symptoms of perfectionism? It's actually not in itself a recognized mental health diagnosis. Maybe it should be, but it definitely leads on to mental health problems. Plenty of serious mental health problems, such as anxiety. That's pretty evident why I would do that. I'm not good enough. So anxiety can be sky high. Depression, anger, low self-esteem, OCD of course, continuous ruminations over thoughts, anorexia, and tragically also to suicide. And all of this is predicated on some rigidly and obsessively held beliefs about high, unattainable standards. And it's worth asking ourselves, when did these standards come into play? And often it's something that's happened when we were very, very young, and we got some ideas about this is how life should be lived, otherwise it isn't good enough. The mindset also leads to something that many patients complain about here when they come and see me. Friends complain about it, and that's procrastination and avoidance. And we cannot, that's one of the ground rules in psychology. If we avoid things, we will never learn whether we could cope with it or not, and we will never learn in general. So we can't avoid. And deep down, it is of course an exaggerated fear of failure. And most people have never actually thought about what is so bad about failure. This is one of the strategies against perfectionism. To consider, is failure actually that bad? And most of the time, it isn't that bad. So it leaves people feeling never good enough. And if they should, against all odds, obtain some of these goals that they've set themselves, the goalpost will shift immediately, and then it will be something else unachievable that they are going for. So they can never win. Do you recognize some of this in yourself? Sadly, I do, but it is somewhat controlled. What perfectionism do is that it undermines ourselves, and it's totally and utterly self-defeating. We talked a little bit about the origin, and traditionally perfectionism is seen as having three origins. So cognition, what we talked about here, these rigidly held, very high standards. So how we process ourselves and the world. Learning, I think that's a very important one. If you look at many people with perfectionism and their upbringings, they've been given these high standards from outside, and they may have taken them over and now see them as themselves, as their own, but deep down, it often comes from the outside. And then there is, like in most mental health problems, there are some genetic factors that also play a role. We won't lose ourselves in the origins, but I want to mention one more thing that I have noticed a lot here with my patients, that they are very often ashamed of themselves. We talked about guilt in one of the last videos here, and shame is, as you may remember, slightly different, because shame is something about that we feel bad about the whole of ourselves, while guilt is often an act that we feel that we have done something wrong in some kind of situation and can maybe be forgiven, while shame is much more profound usually. And that's what people with perfectionism feel, ashamed about themselves. And that's terrible, of course. What strategies can we use? And at this stage, it's probably good to have a pen to hand if you want to write a few things down. The first one is a good old friend of virtual well-being, and that's writing down 2 lists on a piece of paper, on the same piece of paper, please. On one side, what is the cost of perfectionism? And that list is likely to be very long. We talked about that it's self-defeating, it leads to burnout, we don't live our lives. I have a young, wonderful woman that took, very much against my advice, a whole year out of university because she felt so ashamed about herself that she couldn't live up to those standards that she had. So the costs are sky high, and we never relate to other people either when we are perfectionistic, because we are so worried about ourselves all the time. So we're cut off from other people. Any benefits? You may find some. Please list them down if you do. After decades of thinking about this, I can't identify a single benefit. Not even what's usually talked about. Oh, but it actually keeps us on our toes. No, it doesn't. It drives you straight into the wall. That's what it does. In my view, you may have some other ideas. Please let me know if you do. We're comparing. Remember the old expression, compare and despair. Try to be aware of who you compare yourself with. Some unrealistic photoshopped picture on the internet, or some guys that geniuses that are only getting straight A's. Who are you comparing yourself to? Should you be comparing yourself to other people at all? Or should you compare yourself to who you were yesterday? And remember, life is not a race towards continuous progress. It isn't really. And then the next tip is about revising what is so bad about mistakes and failure. That often our failures is how we learn the best, as we've talked about before. And there is actually value in imperfection. I hope you heard that value in imperfection. We also tend to make negative predictions about the future, about our acts. Just if you do that, which most of us do, just try to check out what's the actual factual evidence behind this, and often it's vanishingly small. The human race has, for evolutionary reasons, always feared uncertainty, and that's understandable. But we have to live with a degree of uncertainty, and often if we sit with it, the anxiety about the uncertainty will slowly evaporate. Next tip. The football player Cristiano Ronaldo, he talks about that he's not demanding perfection from himself, but he's striving towards excellence. And what a difference. Not demanding the perfect performance, but striving towards excellence. We're allowed to do that. Try to make a record of all the shoulds. I should be able to get A's. I should be beautiful. I should be able to perform wonderfully socially without any mistakes. Socially, it's often the mistakes that are the funniest moments in our lives. And then another thing that I personally have thought a lot about. Remember, we don't actually have to fit in. We may feel that we have to fit in, but we don't have to fit in. We're allowed to be ourselves and make up our own persona. That is more than good enough, and we actually often add more to the world than if we're clones. Challenge those myths about I have to be perfect to be happy or to be loved. They're actually, if you look at it logically, they're not so difficult to challenge. So please do it. Test out imperfections. I had another patient that is very perfectionistic in how she looks. And one day when she was out, she spilled some milkshake down the front of her on her top. But she had to get home, so she had nothing to change in. And she realized on the way home in the tube that other people were actually not staring at her, that she could live with it even if they did. And that gave her so much more freedom. So please test out imperfections, and it takes courage, I understand that. And then of course we'll finish off on a more general rule. Be kind to yourself, be compassionate to yourself, and relax those rules. Because the Buddhists were not wrong when they talked about that we are what we pay attention to. And if we pay attention to our imperfections, then it's true that we will get shaky. But we have a degree of choice in what we want to pay attention to. Thank you for paying attention to this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time.